bonjour, good morning, and kia ora, as we say in New Zealand. So today I'll talk a little bit about warnings in the public, and this is basically our experience and findings from the work that we've done on earthquake early warning in New Zealand so far. And this is on behalf of my colleagues. It's a big team, and Caroline is here today as well. I'm Marion, and I'm from New Zealand. Work with the Joint Center for Disaster Research at Massey University. But this cohort is just more than Massey University. It's a lot of work from different people, different organizations. On behalf of them, I'm presenting this work today. So just a brief context. Aotearoa, New Zealand is in the Pacific. Probably just it's 2 days to travel there. It's quite remote. There's a land The land area is quite big, maybe as big as the UK, but the population is quite small at 5 million. It also lies on a plate boundary and has a lot of seismicity. But aside from seismic risk, we also have different risks, such as hydrometeorological hazards, and also tsunami, volcanoes. You have all the range of different hazards. It's a living laboratory for studying natural hazard risk. And just a little bit about, because I'm talking about warnings, it's a very complex system in New Zealand on who can issue out warnings. So you have organizations such as the National Emergency Management Agency, who handles warnings nationally, but they also work in close with other organizations. And you have monitoring agencies such as GNS Science, who does monitor the geohazards. You have the Met Service, who monitors the meteorological hazards. But let's say if there's a wildfire, it's going to be managed by the Fire and Emergency. If there's a health pandemic, it's going to be managed by the Ministry of Health. And if there's problems with agriculture or disease with our livestock, it will be handled by the primary industry. So it is a very complex system on who can issue out warnings in New Zealand. And on top of that, there's also 16 regional councils who can do their own localized warnings. But for today, we will concentrate on the geohazard on earthquakes. Earthquake early warning, for some of you, you would know that this is about issuing warnings seconds before ground shaking starts. So this just a picture from the USGS on how it works. The concept is basically information can travel a lot faster than seismic waves. So therefore, we can warn populations further ahead of the propagation of the earthquake if we have set up systems and sensors that we can warn people beforehand. So the interesting thing in New Zealand is that earthquake early warning, although we are very seismically active, there is no official nationwide earthquake early warning system in New Zealand. So it is quite interesting why this is. Perhaps it's because we have a big land area, but also population is small. So there's a question: is it economically viable for us to have a warning system where we have we need infrastructure for this to work, and what is that in terms of economic investments? In 2020, there's the conversation on earthquake early warning has started. There's a bit of reluctance from a lot of people, but then we needed to have this conversation. Should there be earthquake early warning in New Zealand? So a lot of the work has been done by my colleague Julia Becker, just to look at what's the appetite for earthquake early warning in New Zealand. So there's been surveys, doing some focus group on just seeing what's the appetite. So in general, the New Zealand public supports earthquake early warning. The general sentiment is some warning is better than no warning. And the various sectors are also quite interested, but of course a bit of reluctance on how will this work? Who will have access to these warnings? Of course, there's also the risk and liability, responsibility. So there's potential benefits, but sometimes the challenges outweigh the benefits. And of course, we have to also think about economic investment as well. But it doesn't mean that we should, just wait for the green light for the government to say, hey, let's have an earthquake early warning. As researchers and scientists, we need to have this conversation on, is earthquake early warning appropriate? And if it is, how will it look like for New Zealand? So, just a quick note on earthquake early warning. It is a scientific and also a societal challenge. It is a very exciting line of work. If I receive 10 seconds before an earthquake arrives, I'll be very excited. It's incredible. Like, we're all sitting here. Suddenly I get a message on my phone and says, there's a ground shaking that will happen. It's incredible. It's a, groundbreaking technology. But it's not, although it is exciting, there's a lot of societal questions, whether this will be good for society. But how earthquake early warning will be successful, from a seismological standpoint, we need to have accuracy, timeliness of, how do we estimate the arrival of the earthquake. So my seismology colleagues, you would know this a lot better than me, on how can we measure a success in terms of earthquake early warning. For my technology colleagues, success would be about latency. Do we have our systems in place so that we can send warnings in time? Can we detect the ground shaking so that we have, how do we shorten the time for us to be able to give out warnings to the public? From an application operations perspective, of course, we want to give as much lead time as we want to have the warning. If you ask the public, how much time do you need to take protective action? They'll say 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but is that possible, right? So it's this is also really important when we have earthquake early warnings to think about, is it possible? If we can only give 10 seconds warning, is that acceptable? Do we try to work, how do we work this out? How do we give lead time as much as we can for the public? But this is the area of my research, is the human behavior and social science perspective. So if we, have all the science, technology, and even the operational aspect, it's not enough to stop there. Once we have the systems in place, well, the question is, will people do something with this warning? How will people recognize an alert, interpret it, and then respond to it? And this is the area of my research where, this is what I'm really, really interested in. But looking at from a systemic perspective, we can't address these problems in isolation. We have to look at this as a whole. It's a value chain of different disciplines, different sciences, technology, and we have all to work together. We all speak different languages, but at the end, if we want to have an earthquake early warning that is useful for New Zealand, we have to work together. So I'm introducing this approach that we have taken to start this conversation in New Zealand. So yesterday we have talked about interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and I'm just showing you one way that we have done for this approach that we've looked into earthquake early warning. So this is what we call the design science approach. It's not new. We adopted this from information systems. In a sense, we are designing an earthquake early warning, maybe even just at conceptual stage. But to design this, as you have seen, there's many players involved. So in a sense, we look at this holistically and systematically, where there's a project where we're doing design, but also it has to be embedded in the strong research community. But we need to engage local practice in earthquake early warning, but also learn from our colleagues. There's so much work has been done in Japan, in the west coast of the US, Taiwan, China, Mexico. There's so much advances already. And even here in Europe, there's different studies that has been conducted. So we have to also be embedded in global practice. And at the end of the day, we are scientists and researchers. Our contribution is not only to see the feasibility of earthquake early warning in New Zealand, but to add to the discourse of, scientific body of knowledge. So this is the approach that we have taken on starting this conversation in earthquake early warning in New Zealand. And looking at this even further, so in design science, it's a quite an iterative cyclical process where we have to make sure that our research is embedded in the environment, but also knowledge base. There's some cycles that we go through looking at requirements, building, designing, and then making sure that it's rigorous, that it's accepted by the scientific community that we are, part of. So one really important thing when we started this project of investigating earthquake early warning, is to make sure that it's not just a technical scientific exercise, but in New Zealand the context is quite different. The community is quite different, and earthquake early warning is not yet there. So we had to make sure that the application domain is something that we also engage in. So we had to engage the community, the public domain experts, our sectoral industrial partners, making sure that we talk to, infrastructure as well, and how will this communication network work. So when we started this project in 2020, one key thing for us is the community. Community has to be involved in this discussion. If we are to do it right, we need to start somewhere, and that should involve the community. So early on, we were thinking of doing this in Wellington. So early on at the start of the project, one key thing for us was doing research in New Zealand, because we are bounded by the Treaty of Waitangi, the foundational document of New Zealand, that it has also has to be embedded of respecting indigenous knowledge and involving the communities in terms of doing this research. So because our research was based in Wellington, we tried to engage with the local tribe, the Atiawa tribe in the coast of Kapiti. So we engaged with the Whakaronga Rongotai Marae. So the first picture on the left was taken in 2020. So this is the starting of that conversation. Remember, at this stage, earthquake early warning was not yet implemented, or there's only the conversation was starting. But we knew that we wanted to do an experimental network, and wanting to make sure that even if it's a smaller community of indigenous community, that we are engaging in some aspect. The picture on the right is some of my colleagues visiting the marae again. A marae is a meeting house for the Maori, and they have agreed to take part of our experimental network. So they are hosting a sensor for us in our experimental. It's an ongoing process that we have to make sure that we respect different knowledges, but also involve communities in our work. So at early part of our project, we have to make sure that we are true to our commitment to bicultural relationships as well. So that's an ongoing process. But aside from engaging our communities, it's a very complex system. As I showed you, different scientific and technological expertise is needed to have this conversation on earthquake early warning. So one of the early things that we set out to do as was to establish a community of practice comprising of different members who, a community practice is basically anyone who has a common interest to do something together for knowledge, information, and sharing. So for us, we started in 2020, so that was COVID and everything. It was really hard challenge to start this conversation, but we managed to do it. We, reach out to different universities in New Zealand, Crown Research Institutes or CRIs, private sector, emergency management, outreach, and education. Just really to start. And this is very similar to what we've seen with what RISK Institute has done, engaging in webinars, workshops. So one of the early things that we did is we started with what we called a shared values workshop. We did it online because of we couldn't meet face to face. So one thing that we started is, gather the community who's interested in earthquake early warning. Everyone has their own research interest or their own, sectoral interests. And we conducted this workshop called Shared Values. What are our shared values as a community in terms of how do we want to explore earthquake early warning? So this is where we kind of see participation. At the start of the project is that we had this intention of making sure there's some participation from various sectors in the community who's interested in earthquake early warning. So what did we find out in our shared values workshop? So of course, technology is very, very critical in earthquake early warning. But one of the thing is it's not just about getting the best, most expensive technology. We are a small country with limited resources. So one of the things that people said was, we have expertise with our geological survey, or expertise with our universities. What can we make do with what we already have? And kind of, we can't just, so the statement here from one of the contributors is like, it's absolutely crucial for us that we go forward, but we just don't go forward purely with, just getting the best technological platform, but to go forward with some ideological platform of what is capable. Looking at what are the different things that we have that we can pull together. Looking at what is available to us. So, technology is really important. We recognized early on there's emphasis on integration of different parts, data streams, having sensors put out, algorithms, instrumentation, etc. Well, what we also learned in our shared values workshop is that, aside from technology, people are also really, really important. And I think this is a sentiment that is kind of expressed as what I've seen in the RISK Institute for the past day. It's people are at the heart of why we do manage and research risks, right? So it's the same for earthquake early warning. It's not solely in the basis of sound technology, but also making sure that people are well informed. We need to match people's expectations as well as the capability of a system that we will or develop. So we need to have conversations with different groups, and people's perspective should be part of how we will design a system in the future. So one of the key questions that the group was asking, so how do we get communities involved in the process of setting up early warning systems? Finally, it's not just technology and people, but it's also about knowledge. How do we exchange knowledge between the technological and social sides? So before developing, because again, New Zealand is in a special situation where there's no earthquake early warning yet. We have a chance to say how do we want to go about it. So, before developing technological solutions, we need to understand the requirements from the users and also the social aspects of earthquake early warning system. But reciprocally, it's not just let's do whatever the people want, but let's look at what are our capabilities, what are the limitations. And if we can't deliver what people expect, then there should be a way for us to communicate to our communities the technological capabilities and limitations. We also have to be realistic, having clear expectations of what earthquake early warning can and cannot do. And it's a good kind of approach that we have. There's an exchange. It's not just let's develop a system, let's implement it, but there's this kind of we need to manage expectations as well. So from this shared values workshop, this is like outlook towards a national system. But as researchers, we can't implement a national system. What we can do is investigate how this will look like. But at the same time, what we learned from this shared values workshop, we also implemented into our experimental network. And the question earlier is like, how do we integrate people's perspective into developing something for New Zealand? So one of our approaches is what we call a comfort board approach. So it's a participatory method where we try to engage with citizens on what do they think about earthquake early warning. At that time, earthquake early warning was very foreign to a lot of our citizens. So how do you have a conversation about a technology that people don't understand, that people don't have a vision of what this cannot do? They haven't experienced it. So how do you have this conversation? If you ask people, do you want a warning for earthquake? Of course, they will say yes, right? Without understanding the limitations, the technology, the expertise required to do that. So we need to have a more realistic conversation about something that people might not be able to imagine yet. So this is where we kind of engage with our design colleagues to have a way of having conversation with communities. So if you look at this comfort board, it's like a big board game where we put it on the floor. It's an axis of trust and benefit. Because again, if you ask people, do you want a warning? They will say yes. But there's, underlying uh, things about saying yes. Like, of course they see the benefit, but we question, will they trust this system? So what we kind of did was like, have this matrix so that they can place themselves, do they think there's benefit? Do they think this system will be trustworthy? And that kind of shows the, level of comfort with what they have for this technology. Of course, this is the board, but we also designed scenarios for them to put themselves and then there's like smaller boards where they can put themselves in the board to put them, on the benefit trust matrix. So we created stories about what is earthquake early warning, give them a feel of what it can potentially bring. So we designed 5 scenarios wherein they have to put themselves in that matrix and then have that conversation. So if they're pretty low on the comfort scale, we will ask them, okay, you're very uncomfortable right now, but what will make you more comfortable? What will make you more accepting of this system? So we can unpick some of these, it's not just a yes or no question, but we can have a conversation. What can we do to increase benefit? Can we do so that we can increase trust? So we engage in 8 communities in different geographical locations in New Zealand. And with these 8 communities, we also try to diversify a bit on the type of people that we engage in. So there's like, we often think warnings are sent out to the general public, but the general public is quite diverse, right? So we also engage. So in our 8 communities, we engage with the elderly, Maori community, coastal community, migrant community, and urban population, rural population. So we try to get a diverse range of perspectives as we engage in this method of trying to understand what people would expect or how people would trust an earthquake early warning system. So this is published, and I'll just share a few of the results that we got that are quite interesting. So one thing is public engagement is important. People do feel like a system like this, there should be some engagement. One of the quotes that we extracted is like, there should be some sort of information about what is possible and what is advisable to do within any particular time interval. So because one of the scenarios we said, you get 10 seconds of warning. So for people, it's like, what can I do with 10 seconds, right? Is it, can I do drop, cover, and hold, or is this just kind of some sort of psychological preparedness so that I will be prepared for some ground shaking? And one of the things is, there should be engagement, but this conversations should start even, maybe we can engage with schools or kura, as the Maori would call it, with starting with our children or tamariki. So public engagement is quite important. That was quite highlighted by most of the communities that we were talking with. And the other thing is about transparency. Of course, in any system, it's not foolproof, right? We will get false warnings, missed warnings. And what we found out was quite interesting. People are actually receptive to receiving false alarms. So they're very understanding. They know that systems are not perfect. But one thing is that it's about transparency. Yeah. So it would be good to know a little bit more who has created this model. And I'll come back to this point later on. Who's in charge of this, who's collecting the data, how does it work, things like that. It would give them a lot more confidence in the system if they knew the organization involved in what they're doing at earthquake early warning. So transparency is one key thing that we also highlighted. It's a common theme with the communities that we were working with. And also inclusion. And inclusion here is not just the Maori communities, although the Maori communities, they said, a lot of times when technological developments are made, they're often excluded from the conversation. So when we engage in these communities, they felt like at least they're part of they're on the table to start having these conversations. Yeah, so yeah, and they express it in a lot of systems that Maori are always excluded from these conversations happening between companies, institutions, agencies, and the public from participating in this kaupapa or initiative. And it's not just the Maori communities. When we talk to the elderly, they said like they feel like often elderly with digital divide, they're often excluded from these conversations. Or like one mother talked to us and they said, my child is autistic. How will this warning kind of affect us as a family? And coastal communities, they're thinking, how will this affect them as well? And so one of the findings is, so different communities have different needs, especially in New Zealand. We're coastal community. A large part of our population live in the coast. So one of the key questions that always they ask us, if there's earthquake early warning, will we get a tsunami warning? And I guess for a lot of people who have worked on earthquake early warning, it stops at earthquake early warning, right? We're talking about ground shaking. But for some of the communities, like they tell us, if it doesn't tell us about tsunami, then how will this help the community? So we also have to think about, maybe earthquake early warning cannot warn about tsunami, but this is a conversation we need to be able to say in our limitations and capabilities as a system. And so one of the statement mentioned as well by coastal communities that it has to be linked to the tsunami, because for those living at the coast, the risk, the hazard that they're most interested in is tsunami more than the ground shaking from an earthquake. Right. So again, a lot of this is helpful for us to think about earthquake early warning in a national scale. But we also included this in our experimental work once we started doing some technological work that we did. So a little bit about our experimental network. So so we started with our community of practice. We reached out to communities and end users. And the insights that we have learned for our communities, we had to make sure that we integrate them once we started developing our experimental network. That means having conversations with our participants. So this is what they call citizen seismology. So we get the public to host a sensor for us, and they become part of our experimental network. So we give them a seismometer. It's up to them where they want to put it. We have some instructions. It's better to be on the ground, preferably not on a carpet. All of these things. But it's a sensor that we lend to them. It's their decision where they want to put it. We have some suggestions and then kind of engage in a conversation with them. So we have about maybe 30 or more sensors. And on the coast, our Marae has hosted one sensor as well. And we also had to communicate to them. This is an experimental network. It's not official. We're not going to give out alerts. What we're going to do is we're going to read ground motion data, and it will help our network. It will help our experiments. It will help us understand latency, the science and technology behind it. And we had to be transparent about this, managing their expectations, whether they can receive a warning or not, and how are they contributing to the scientific knowledge. So we also have a dashboard where they can see their ground motion data, and really engaging with them. So it's again learning from that experience from doing those community workshops once we start doing this experimental network. So that's, we started having this kind of approach using social sciences and then help us build relationship with our communities. Now we have a good network when we can start doing some experiments. So onto the technical side. Because in one of the things that we do, we're a scientific group, is to look at what's the possibility. Like I said, it's a small country. We economically, we might not have the resources to have a very dense network. So one of the things that we did is looking at the low cost approach. So using sensors that are available from off the shelf, and looking at how can we improve latency. So our approach is a bit more, interesting in a sense that yeah, we can do something interesting technically. So yeah, so we use low cost technology sensors. We try to look at decentralized architecture to improve, not so decentralized architecture, so that we don't have only one center. If it gets cut off, then we don't have a system. So this start to look at edge computing, where our sensors do the computations at the sensor itself without going into a centralized system. And then looking at alternative networks. So currently our system is using internet, but of course, if there's a huge earthquake, internet might break down. So looking at other kind of alternative networks as well, so that our sensors can still talk to each other. Yeah, so we have published some of these work. Of a really, really smart student, Chantujan, who's done incredible work in the technological aspect of this work. Yeah, and the thing is, technology is always evolving. It's really hard to research technology because there will always be innovation. So along the way, when we were doing this work, the Android Google system came in. So if you have an Android phone, it might be capable to send you an earthquake early warning. In New Zealand, we don't have super strict regulation who can send out warnings. So therefore, Google could come in and be a player in earthquake early warning. So by 2021, I think New Zealand, Greece, some other countries, Android kind of implemented this system. Of course, this shake up our work a little bit because now the public can receive warnings. And if you know New Zealand, we get a lot of earthquakes. So yeah, the public started receiving alerts without really knowing that their phones can do this. So we tried to understand this as well. Take this opportunity. We can't stop Google, but what we can do is try to understand how the public receives this information. So the thing is, Google implemented it. There was no clear public education. The institutions in New Zealand were quite quiet about this as well. Nobody really made any public, educational statement about the role of this alerting system coming into New Zealand. So we studied it. There were 2 large earthquakes in October. Not large destructive earthquakes, but enough to send out warnings to a huge population. So what we did is we issued out a survey for each of these events and tried to look at how did people react and perceive the warnings. So again, earthquake early warning. If you receive it, it's amazing because it's it's really interesting technology. So most people, they perceive it to be useful. They found it really novel. They think that it's going to be helpful. So most of our participants from our survey think that the alert is useful. But they have very limited knowledge on earthquake early warning. They didn't know who was issuing out the warning. And remember the finding that we found earlier on in our community engagement. So this is a question we asked them: who do you think sent out the warning? And this is two data sets. So on the October 12th and October 21st, 2021. We asked them, who do you think sent out the warning? So most people thought that it came from our geological survey, but it wasn't. It's sent out by Android. So this affects how people perceive our institutions as well. If there's a false alert, how will that affect their perception of an institution that have been, working on the geological hazards? A huge proportion knew that it came from Google, but not as, also a huge proportion thought it came from our emergency management agency. So people don't distinguish who sends out these alerts. And if so if there's a misalert, false alert, that can also affect their perceptions of other institutions who are giving out warnings, and it can affect trust in our warning system. So yeah, so that's a bit alarming to know. So we communicated this to our geological survey, to our emergency management agency, and we said, you need to do something about this. You need to have a public education aspect of the role of Google in issuing earthquake early warnings. So with our conversation, they did something, sent out some public education materials talking about Google as a system and what role our institutions have on them. Yeah, and the conversation is ongoing. It's still going with, oops, sorry. I'll explain what this is. It's our outreach component. Okay, so sorry, I wasn't meant to click that. But aside from the science and the research that we do, one component of our team also do outreach and education. And this not only talk to communities, but we think it's quite important to be engaged with the youth as well. So in Wellington, we engage with our schools in a technological competition, and we gave them sensors, seismometers for them to learn a little bit about earthquake early warning, ground motion, how to detect ground motion, and then kind of challenge them. Okay, if you were to imagine an alerting system, what would it look like? Of course, they're kids, they're creative, they create this different ways of communicating and their own spin to things, but it's really just a great way to engage. So one of the students told me, one great thing about doing these things is that they have greater appreciation of the science and technology behind what they have on their phones, the apps. There's so much work to detect and to interpret data and to send out the alerts. So a part of what we do with our team is we also do this. We've been running it for 4 years now. Every year we hold this competition just to have a conversation with the youth as well, to have some awareness of some of these things. So yeah, so it's a huge effort by everyone to think about earthquake early warning. And yeah, so the kind of key takeaways for me is, from doing this work over the last 4 years, is that it's having effective warnings is a multifaceted challenge. It will require approaches from various disciplines. We hope that we can do a holistic approach in understanding and communicating warnings to end users. And yeah, it's the technological and economical feasibility is really, really important. But one thing that we really advocate for is that if we are to have systems, and part of that system should also incorporate engagement and education. It's not an add-on. It should be part of that system in creating a warning system. So yeah, so that's kind of our experience for the last 4 years on having this conversation about warnings. We try to do participation, try to understand perception, and it's an ongoing thing. And what's great now is that we are now having conversations with the National Emergency Management Agency and the Geological Survey, where we might have a chance to go for bigger biddings and see how we move forward earthquake early warning in New Zealand. Yeah, that's it.